Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to announce that Senator J.D. Vance has the overwhelming support of this convention to be the next Vice President of the United States.
Who has heard the poem called The Snake? On her way to work one morning, down the path along the lake, a tender-hearted woman saw a poor, half-frozen snake. Take me in, oh tender woman, take me in for heaven's sake. Take me in, oh tender woman, sighed the vicious snake.
I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious.
She clutched him to her bosom. You're so beautiful, she cried. But instead of saying thank you, that snake gave her a vicious bite.
Fellow Christians, everyone is watching us when we apologize for this man. Lord, help us.
I have saved you, cried the woman, and you've bitten me, heavens why?
That he was fundamentally divisive, arrogant.
You know your bite is poisonous, and now I'm going to die.
He's leading our political discourse to a very negative place.
Oh, shut up, silly woman, said the reptile with a grin.
Might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole.
You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him.
So what choice will you make?
Yeah, I'm not announcing that here and now. I'm not going to be voting for President Trump. I made that clear. I know for some people, character is not the number one issue. It is for me. When someone has been, determined by a jury to have committed sexual assault, that's not someone who I want my kids and grandkids to see as president of the United States.
This drip, drip, drip of lawmakers coming out and asking the president to step aside. Now, leaks about leadership conversations last night. Can we expect more of this? What are you hearing?
What it really feels like, Jose, is that the drips and leaks might be the thing to finally break the dam, that this is not going to be some kind of massive watershed moment publicly, but instead that it might come through blind reports that we're seeing overnight about conversations that the president had with top members of Congress. And look, based on the statements that we've gotten from both Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries' office as recently as this morning in the last few hours, what's clear is that those offices are not shying away from saying that their bosses relayed concerns to the president. In the case of Chuck Schumer, it's that it was a blunt, private conversation. In the case of Hakeem Jeffries, we knew, and then he went in a Dear Colleague letter to his colleagues here to say that he was relaying the concerns that we have heard from Democrats and that he has heard from Democrats. Hakeem Jeffries has really run this caucus up here on the Hill since his time being atop it as someone who really does embark on listening tours of his members. He himself doesn't weigh in, but he gives his members the space to vent their concerns. In this case, it's been a lot of venting of frustrations, of panic, both about the drag that Biden could have on their own reelection efforts, but also out of concern because all of these Democratic members know the stakes in needing to defeat former President Trump. Many of them say that one of their biggest concerns in the aftermath of the debate was not just that Biden couldn't do the job, but that he couldn't carry the message, and that the message is one of just such stark contrast, whether it's on something like Project 2025 or abortion or basic transitions of democracy, peaceful transfers of power, talking about January 6th. Democrats want the focus to be there, and instead you have seen this continued circular firing squad. And so a lot of attention is being paid to what Schumer and what Jeffries might have told the president in their private conversations. But again, if they're saying they relayed concerns, and we know from talking to members what those concerns are, we have a pretty good sense then of what might have been said to the president. And so it is clear at this point, as John so rightly said, that Biden is getting those warnings from key people within his own party, but is remaining steadfast at this point in saying he's going to be the party's nominee. At least that's where the conversations stand right now.
Yeah, I mean, Ali Rafa, what's the White House?
So some of you may have heard Donald Trump's running mate deliver remarks at the Republican National Convention. He talked about his life story about growing up in Southwest Ohio, and it was compelling. It's a compelling story. And it was not the full story. Frankly, what is very telling is what he did not talk about on that stage. He did not talk about Project 2025, their 900-page blueprint for a second Trump term. He did not talk about it because their plans are extreme and they are divisive. In recent days, they've been trying to portray themselves as the party of unity. But here's the thing. If you claim to stand for unity, you need to do more than just use the word. You cannot claim you stand for unity if you are pushing an agenda that deprives whole groups of Americans of basic freedoms, opportunity, and dignity. You cannot claim you stand for unity if you are intent on taking reproductive freedoms from the people of America and the women of America. Trying to ban abortion nationwide as they do and restrict access to IVF and contraception as their plan calls for. You cannot claim to be for unity if you try to overturn a free and fair election and threaten to terminate the United States Constitution. And you cannot claim to be for unity when your entire economic agenda is designed to prioritize billionaires and big corporations over the middle class. We're too busy watching what you're doing to hear what you're saying. Last night, we heard claims that Donald Trump is for fighting for our seniors. Well, how the heck can you claim you fight for seniors when you intend to cut Social Security and Medicare? Which we all know is a lifeline for so many of our seniors. Let me be very clear. President Joe Biden and I will always protect Social Security, and we will always protect Medicare. All while we continue to fight to lower the cost of prescription drugs for our seniors. It is President Biden and I that took on Big Pharma and finally capped the cost of insulin for our seniors at $35 a month. Who here has a family member with diabetes to know what that means? Right. But Donald Trump and his running mate intend to get rid of our $35 cap on insulin. They will side with Big Pharma and let them make prescription drugs more expensive. Not only that, on the issue of health care, they intend to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Donald Trump and his allies tried more than 60 times to end the Affordable Care Act. 60 times. To give insurance companies back the power to deny people with pre-existing conditions. Y'all remember what that was like? Children with asthma, women who had survived breast cancer, grandparents with diabetes. President Biden and I, on the other hand, have made the Affordable Care Act more strong. Because, you see, we believe health care should be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it.
So it does come down to one question. What do you think? Do you think Biden can survive? Do you think he will survive? The question I don't really also understand, which should be asked, is why is the media, and not even the sort of Trump media like Fox and Newsmax, but you now had NBC, CBS, even MSNBC. What is actually in it for them? It's a straight question. What is in it for them by, so I'm trying to cross the road at the same time. What is in it for them by replacing President Biden? When surely right now there should be, because what's happening, it's almost like the former President of the United States of America is being given a totally green card. Says what he likes. You can't even ask a question with regard to what happened with the shooting. You're not allowed the assassination. You're not allowed to ask anything. There's no medical reports. There's like nothing. And no one's saying anything at all. It's almost like, it's as close as you'll ever come. Let me see if I can cross the road here. It's as close as you ever come to that fable, without crossing the road, the king in his new clothes. Because it's Trump, it's okay. Nobody is saying anything. And this crescendo, which is building towards President Biden, I think somewhere along the line it's affecting democracy, because there are a lot of people who did vote for Biden. Could be you. We all say he's kind of irrelevant. It's been totally pushed to one side at the moment, literally pushed to one side. I mean, no offence to the likes of Joe Scarborough, Rachel Maddow, the Conservative News Network, Jake Tapper and all like that. Why do they get to have a big say in what's going on ahead of you? Okay? Why are they almost determining what happens on November the 5th with election day? It's crazy.
Sharer. He's a serious reporter. He has good sourcing. I want to read from him directly. Former President Barack Obama has told allies in recent days that President Biden's path to victory has greatly diminished, and he thinks the president needs to seriously consider the viability of his candidacy. And here's the sourcing. Multiple people briefed on his thinking. This does not show up by accident, Emily. He has greenlighted, in my opinion, as someone who's worked in press, his aides to share this with the Washington Post.
Which is a crucial sea change, Kaylee. And actually before, Marie, when you were talking about it, in my head I was like, no, he doesn't need to come out and say it, because he did it non-verbally. When he guided the president off the stage, he showed the world the president's frailty. He showed the world that Barack Obama was still the elder of the party. Although, Marie, that made me feel like I'm an ancient. But at the end of the day, we are now seeing the materialization of the apparitions. Right? Because prior to this, for example, as former Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, well, Pelosi controls everyone, right? So Schiff coming out and saying that meant Pelosi told him to do so. Well, then we have reporting that Pelosi herself is speaking face to face with Biden and saying it's time to give this a rest. So what we are seeing is those unseen hands that we knew guiding those forces, writing the letter for George Clooney, telling him to come out. All of those forces are all of a sudden now saying, I'm putting my name directly out there. That represents a fundamental current change. And I think at the end of the day, we are now seeing Biden against the world.
I'm being totally serious. If you never left a comment before, comment now. How do you feel about all of this? How do you feel the fact that you may well be a lifelong President Biden supporter? You are looking forward to casting your vote for President Biden on November the 5th. But that's been taken away from you. You know, where people like Judge Shapiro, Hannity, are having kind of a bigger say in who you get to vote for, who the Democratic nomination is, than you. I mean, that is just, I don't think there is any scenario or situation like that before. Sorry, I'm sweating here. Because the heat, 1 second. The heat that's being put on Biden at the moment, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it politically before. Where does it end? Comment section now, please. It is day 3 of Clown Show Live.
He will arrest the criminal illegal immigrants and put them behind bars. Or send them back.
How does it relate to our everyday world? That's the thing, because the subjects they're talking about, well, you try and do the connection. It's like dot to dot with your eyes closed. Promise you.
Every single evening this week, the Republican National Convention is printing signs for delegates and attendees to wave. And tonight's sign is very revealing of where the party is right now. It says mass deportations now. Mass deportations now. That is the kind of policy that is alarming, even cruel, even un-American to folks on the left. And that is the intended effect. Someone I spoke to just a moment ago said it's going to make heads explode. And you may wonder, is that where the Republican Party is today? I did a little digging. I can tell you from my reporting during the primary season talking to voters, the answer is absolutely yes. And the answer from pollsters is absolutely yes. 3 out of 4 Republicans want immigration to decline in America, and they believe that immigration brings in drugs, brings in crime, and makes the economy worse, even, quote, reduces social and moral values. On top of that, a full 80% of Republicans, according to CBS News' own polling, agree with Donald Trump when he says that illegal immigration is poisoning the blood of the country, one of his most explosive phrases. When you think about the journey that the Republican Party has taken from the party of George W. Bush and his efforts to reform immigration in this country, some of his primetime addresses about America's history as a country of immigrants, to where we are now, it is quite a journey and something we'll be chewing over not only this evening, but I think for years to come.
Biography, because I've been so struck, not just by what we've heard, Kristen, but what we have not heard this whole week. All the rally favorites, the greatest hits about the 2020 election being stolen. No one's mentioning it. Political grievances, weaponizing government. Nobody's mentioning it. Nobody's calling the January 6th rioters patriots or hostages. All of that seems to have been excised from what the Republican Party is trying to portray here on this stage. It is notable.
It's very notable, and we are told that the Republican National Committee did urge some of these speakers to tone down their language in these speeches, and so clearly we're hearing a reflection of that in these speeches. It represents a shift. It represents, to some extent, what we heard from former President Trump after the assassination attempt against his life, which is that he ripped up his speech completely, that he has rewritten his speech. I interviewed Eric Trump today. He says his dad is finished with that rewrite. He has said it will be a call for unity. Now, we're not exactly hearing that in every speech, but you're absolutely right, Savannah. It is so notable that these speeches are toned down and devoid of some of that typical red meat that you hear from former President Trump and from his allies.
Trying to expand beyond just the base. They'll need to get past the base.
It's a recognition that they want to reach out to those suburban voters, that they want to reach out to those who aren't necessarily in the Republican tent right now, that former President Trump feels confident his base is always going to be there. But this is really the first time we've tried to see him soften his edges. We saw that in some of the speeches last night where Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who served as his press secretary, talked about him as a grandfather, as a father. Laura Trump, his daughter-in-law, did the same. And it's a clear strategic move, not only to meet this moment and the mood of the country, this somber backdrop against which we all sit here, but again, to try to win over some additional voters.
Mr. Speaker, as a daughter of Selma and a representative of Alabama's Civil Rights District, the fight for voting rights is very personal to me. It was in Selma where hundreds of foot soldiers like John Lewis shed blood on a bridge for the equal right of all Americans to vote. They marched, they bled, they prayed, and some even died for the right to vote. Mr. Speaker, the legislation before us today makes a mockery of their legacy. House Republicans' so-called SAVE Act is a dangerous, anti-democratic bill that would do nothing to protect our elections. Where our colleagues across the aisle claim that this bill will prevent non-citizens from voting, we know that it is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. In fact, under current law, non-citizens would face up to 5 years in prison for attempting to vote in federal elections and even risk being deported. In reality, this legislation would purge thousands of eligible voters from the rolls, including Americans who recently got married or changed their last names, and those with military and tribal IDs. Americans should see this bill for what it is, a cynical attempt to sow doubt in the minds of voters about the integrity of our elections. It is yet another attempt to fan the flames of election denial by the same extremists who brought us the January 6th insurrection. Mr. Speaker, we are elected officials who should be fighting to protect and expand access to the ballot box, not restrict it. We should be working to advance the progress made by the civil rights and voting rights movement rather than rolling it back. But let's be clear. The biggest threat to our election is not non-citizen voting. It is the lack of federal oversight, which has allowed the states to advance hundreds of new laws and new bills, making it harder for Americans to vote. Mr. Speaker, the House should be considering H.R. 14, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which I introduced in September. H.R. 14 will restore federal oversight. It would establish a new formula to protect and prevent states with a recent history of voter discrimination from restricting voter access. In doing so, it will protect access to the ballot box for every eligible American. After all, it is up to the voters to choose our elected leaders, not the other way around. Never did I think that 60 years after John Lewis was bludgeoned on a bridge in my hometown of Selma, Alabama, that I would be fighting to restore the full protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It goes to show that progress is elusive and every generation must fight to preserve the progress of the past and to advance it. John Lewis didn't give up, and neither will we. Mr. Speaker, House Republicans' so-called SAVE Act is a dangerous anti-democratic bill that has no place on this floor.
The place I would like to see the Republican Party go over the long run is we are the party of self-governance. 10 years from now, the administrative state mostly does not exist in its current form. 10 years from now, the regulatory state, most unconstitutional federal regulations have been rescinded. That we actually have congressmen who are able to debate through the front door with greater responsibility what the laws of this country should be, with far more precise laws than the vague delegation of authority to the regulatory state. That's number one. Number two is we've restored the rule of law in this country. Take the number one issue where the rubber hits the road on this is in the question of immigration. 3 core principles for immigration going forward. I think this is the vision for the Republican Party. This is the vision for a second Trump term. What I believe it should be, certainly. No migration without consent. Consent should only be granted to the migrants who benefit the United States of America and share American values. And those who enter without consent have to be removed. 3 simple principles, because I think most Americans agree with this. The consequences of this may involve some policies that people disagree with, but the principles: no migration without consent. Consent should be granted only to those Americans who actually benefit the United States of America and share our values. And number 3 is if you enter without consent, you got to be removed. That, I think, is the North Star for where we'll be 10 years from now. 2 mass deportations are required to get there. One is the mass deportation of a lot of illegals who are in this country right now. And the second is the mass deportation of many federal, probably millions of federal bureaucrats out of Washington, D.C.
Mass deportations now. Mass deportations now. That is the kind of policy that is alarming, even cruel, even un-American to folks on the left. And that is the intended effect. Someone I spoke to just a moment ago said it's going to make heads explode. And you may wonder, is that where the Republican Party is today? I did a little digging. I can tell you from my reporting during the primary season talking to voters, the answer is absolutely yes. And the answer from pollsters is absolutely yes. 3 out of 4 Republicans want immigration to decline in America, and they believe that immigration brings in drugs, brings in crime, and makes the economy worse, even, quote, reduces social and moral values. On top of that, a full 80% of Republicans, according to CBS News' own polling, agree with Donald Trump when he says that illegal immigration is poisoning the blood of the country, one of his most explosive phrases. When you think about the journey that the Republican Party has taken from the party of George W. Bush and his efforts to reform immigration in this country, some of his primetime addresses about America's history as a country of immigrants, to where we are now, it is quite a journey.